Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us as part of our Price Executive Virtual Forum. This is part of our Local Leaders Executive Education Program that we have actually had for the last 8 years at the Price School for mayors, council members, special district board members, city managers, and we've matriculated over 500 of them through this program. We're very proud of it and honored to have you all with us today. In particular, I am delighted to have two very special guests that I am sure you will enjoy very much on this transportation topic, which is certainly extremely important in light of what we're experiencing, especially the public transportation component. I'm delighted to have my dear friend and colleague, Marlon Boarnet, a nationally and internationally recognized scholar on transportation policy and transportation economics. And of course, one of the most recognized faces and figures in public transportation in the nation, Phillip Washington of Metro. I am thankful that they've joined us for this discussion. Just a little bit of logistics, as was mentioned, please submit your questions in our Q&A box feature. We are on Zoom Live and we are on Facebook Live. Hopefully a number of you will see this live, and then we'll of course share it after the fact once we're done. But at this point, their bios, by the way, are on our website if you wish to look. I don't want to waste too much of the time, but welcome them both to USC and to USC Price Executive Education Forum. Gentlemen, thank you very much on behalf of the university as well as our school. Marlon, take it from here.
Thank you. Thank you, Frank, and really a pleasure to be here and a pleasure to have a chance to talk with you, Phil. This is a wonderful opportunity. LA Metro is a huge organization, 11,000 employees, $20 billion in infrastructure, and with a very ambitious agenda. And these are really difficult and unusual times. Could you start maybe by sharing with the audience the leadership journey that prepared you for this, and what took you from the south side of Chicago to become CEO of one of the largest transportation systems in the world?
Well, first of all, thank you, Marlon. Just appreciate being here. Appreciate USC and the School of Public Policy. I'm not sure anything prepares you for, a job like this, with all the things that we're doing and all the things that we are accountable for. On a day-to-day basis, and the infrastructure that we're responsible to build in the largest county in America. But what I will do is just give you a background or my background. I am from the south side of Chicago. I grew up there as the only son of six with a single mother who worked 12, 14 hours a day, who struggled all of her life and took public transportation. All of us took public transportation. We didn't have a car for many years. Grew up in public housing in a place called Argyle Gardens, which is one of the oldest public housing complexes in the country, actually, and also, of course, Chicago. I left Chicago after graduation from high school. And actually, I joined the United States Army before I graduated from high school. I signed up at 17 years old and left to join the Army. And I thought it would be maybe a 2 or 3 year stint. I ended up staying for almost 25 years. Had various tours, good jobs, bad jobs, deployments, and everything else. I was active duty person the entire time and was stationed in different parts of the world. I'm also a disabled veteran as well. But it was a very rewarding time, my nearly 25 years in the military. As I was contemplating retirement from the military, um, actually, I hadn't made up my mind to retire just yet. I got orders to go to Korea, and I thought about going to Korea, and it was a 1 year unaccompanied tour. And I thought I would do that 1 year unaccompanied tour and then come back to the States and retire. At the last minute, the military decided to make it a 2 year unaccompanied tour, and unaccompanied meaning that you cannot take your family. I thought, well, maybe that's the writing on the wall for me. And maybe if you're changing it to a 2 year unaccompanied tour, maybe it's time for me to retire. I submitted my retirement papers, and I was in Colorado at the time, stationed in Colorado, which is why people think I'm from Colorado. It's just where I retired from the military and got into transportation. And the CEO there at the Denver Transit District at that time was a Vietnam veteran and understood my level of responsibility at that time in the military and gave me a chance to come in and help him run the agency. And that started my career in the military. And so I'm here now, and the largest infrastructure program in North America is right here in Los Angeles. And we have a huge on-street operations, buses and trains and highway improvement. We're unique in that we are responsible for highway improvements as well, and not just transit.
Thank you so much. And for a few years, I've been saying LA Metro has the largest infrastructure program in North America, and I felt like I'd never checked it. So I'm really glad to hear your confirmation of that.
Yeah.
Are there particular things that you would reflect on in terms of your leadership style during the pandemic and how it's affected Metro that seem to be important points for you?
Yes. Leadership is one of those things. I mean, it's hard to define, but you kind of know it when you see it, kind of thing. I've always said, and this is a spinoff from a very good friend of mine that teaches at the Harvard Kennedy School. And I ascribe to this as well. And he talks about, leadership being dangerous, because it is. I mean, if everything were going well, and you were making decisions in in the midst of everything going well, then there would be no big deal. But leadership, as he says, my friend at Harvard, he talks about leadership being the art of disappointing people at a rate that they can absorb. Now, if they can't absorb it, or if you disappointing them, at too high of a rate, then, you're in trouble as a leader. But I think the idea of making tough decisions, which we have had to make during this pandemic, not just here at LA Metro, but all over the country, and working with people all over the country in the infrastructure space, I think requires good decision making. It requires, I think, a level of experience. I think it also requires a bit of wisdom as well that comes with experience. So one of the things that I always thought about when I was in the military, as I was preparing to leave the military, and I think every soldier, airman, sailor that's been in a long time, they think about the same thing. And that is, what are my transferable skills? I mean, what is it that I can do when I get out or take off the uniform? And I thought about that as well. I mean, my first military unit when I was 18 years old was air defense artillery. I was in air defense artillery outfit. And, as you get out the military, you can't really, you have to think about what's transferable with that. Or if you are an infantryman, I mean, what's transferable? And I struggled with that for a long time. What is transferable? And it dawned on me late in my military career, as I was making the transition, that the transferable thing is leadership. That is the transferable thing. And I think if we have that, if we cultivate that, and we continue to learn, we can be good leaders. And I would point to that when you talk about leadership and leadership styles. I'm very, situational in the respect that sometimes, you have to tell folks what to do in an authoritarian style, and sometimes you want to be, participative and democratic. So I think it's a situational style of leadership is what I would point to.
I will tell you, Phil, this is really resonating with me. We launched a couple of years ago an Executive Master of Urban Planning degree here in the Price School for mid-career individuals, and we get some applications from people who have been career military who are making a move. And in reviewing those, it is just what you said. The skill that is obvious, that can really position them for careers, I'm thinking in urban planning at that point, is their leadership experience. And oftentimes the scale of that and the decision-making position. So I have had the pleasure of reading some of these applications. So I am very impressed by what that kind of background can bring. So,
Absolutely.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about COVID-19 and the pandemic, and in particular impacts on public transit in LA Metro. And they've been big. And maybe start by just kind of walking the audience through what's happened to ridership and what that does to Metro's position.
Yeah. So ridership for us now, pre-COVID, we were moving and transporting about 1.2 million people a day, making us the second or third largest transit agency behind New York. And so 1.2 million people a day is a lot of folks, and it's a lot of responsibility and accountability. Well, COVID hit the second week of March or so. And then in April, our ridership went down to a low of about 275,000 a day. So from 1.2 million to 275,000 a day. Huge, huge drop. The stay-at-home orders, everything that we know about. And we had to make some adjustments. Some of the adjustments were reducing service. There are various philosophies out there about transit. Some folks say, well, keep your 100% level of service out there and the ridership will come. Well, guess what? We had stay-at-home orders. The ridership was not coming. We had telecommuting and all of that. And so we reduced service to sort of an enhanced Sunday service because we didn't have the ridership. And so we also implemented rear door boarding because we did not want, people coming into contact with our operators. One of the really good things that we did 2 or 3 years ago, actually, was we installed bus operator barriers, plexiglass barriers. Now, we didn't do that for the pandemic. We actually did that for bus operators' assaults because our bus operators were being assaulted by just, crazy people. I mean, who assaults a bus operator? But we had those bus operator barriers already installed when the pandemic hit, which was fantastic. And so 100% of our fleet was equipped with those. So we did rear door boarding anyway, in addition to the barriers. And so we went through that with that lower ridership for a number of months. What we see now, though, is the boardings and the ridership is creeping up. We are over 600,000 a day now from that low of 275. So we're seeing people come back, and I think those numbers will continue to climb as our local economy reopens.
And by the way, and I had a chance to take a look at the numbers. So in some sense, I knew this situation, but I wanted to be sure that those in the audience understood it. That's truly unprecedented. No agency has ever seen that drop of almost, about 75% in that kind of suddenness. What is the key as we come out of the pandemic,
Right.
which is not clearly evident now, but what's the key to get ridership back?
Well, there's a couple of things, and hopefully we'll go back to the finances and funding in a minute, because that was another huge impact. But I think the key are really three things. One is cleaning, enhanced cleaning, which we have done, and we've strengthened our cleaning protocols on all of our buses, all of our trains, at our stations. And that will become very, very important to winning back rider confidence. The second is requiring face coverings. Requiring face coverings on our system. And I'm happy to report that about 99% of our ridership is complying with the requirement for face coverings. And we see that, and we have been able to monitor that. And the third big thing, I think, is air circulation, good air circulation. I think those three things are sort of the foundation for bringing people back. Now, folks will say, well, what about social distancing? I believe that it is unsustainable for a large transit agency to do the 6 feet and all of that. I mean, it's called mass transit for a reason. The word mass. And so I think that the first three things I talked about are very, very important. But if we look to maintain 6 feet distance and all of that, we would have to put out maybe 300 or 400 more buses, which we are not financially equipped to do. And that'll be controversial, of course.
Yeah. And really no system was ever built to do that. That's inherently counter to the whole idea of mass transit. So, yeah.
That's exactly right.
You know what, the financial question is a really tough one. I mean, certainly the sales tax Metro revenues that are important for LA Metro have presumably declined by quite a lot. So on the fiscal side, you all are looking at essentially kind of getting squeezed from both ends, right? Revenues are down, costs are up.
Yeah, right.
So tell us a little bit about what that means.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, so the primary source of revenue and funding for us, as you know, Marlon, is sales tax revenue. And we went to the voters in 2016. We've got a Measure M, and we're building out tremendous infrastructure in this county that I think will make us the transportation center of excellence in the country. And so over 2 fiscal years, we forecast that we would lose in sales tax revenue $1.8 billion over 2 fiscal years. And so we had to make some really drastic changes and revisions in what we were thinking about. People don't realize that, when we have a shutdown of restaurants, indoor dining and all that, restaurants actually are about 15% of our sales tax revenue that we receive. So that is huge, along with everything else. And so we were looking at a $1.8 billion loss over 2 fiscal years. And so immediately what I briefed the board on what my plan would be was to immediately do some cost control measures, hiring freezes, the many projects that we have, deferring those projects, but finding a way to move them slower, keep them moving, but move them slower than what we would normally do. And then the CARES Act. The CARES Act that Congress approved in late March, I believe it was, LA County got $1 billion in CARES Act. You may have noticed that in that CARES Act, which was $3 trillion or so, that transit got 25 billion of that nationwide, and LA County got $1 billion of it. Now, all of that did not come to LA Metro because we fund all of the other mobility providers, namely the bus companies, Big Blue Bus and Foothill Transit. We fund all of them. And so we made distribution to them as well as MetroLink, as well as a paratransit service. So Metro ended up getting about 860 million of the 1 billion. And so that still leaves us $1 billion loss, and we're still dealing with that. But I think we have been able to manage better than any other large agency in this country because of the things that we did early on.
Mm-hmm. The CARES Act, let me kind of use that to bring up the question, what does LA Metro, what do LA other metro systems need from the federal government? Yeah. What would be kind of a good policy position? You know, what should the government be doing at this point?
Well, I think a couple of things, and I was a little bit disappointed just last week when USDOT did not require face coverings, nationally, and a lot of people miss that. But I'm kind of nerdy where I watch that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. But I think we need another round of stimulus. And when I say we, I mean infrastructure institutions, regardless of mode. I believe transit agencies need another injection, and we've made that call through the American Public Transportation Association, or APTA. We've made that call for additional $32 billion nationally. I believe aviation, when we talk about infrastructure, I believe aviation needs another round as well. But I think that just from a policy perspective, I think doing the things that we've done and even mandating the things that we've done on a national level as it relates to the cleaning, face covering requirements, those things, plus additional stimulus as a national policy, I think makes sense, because I believe that transit really is facing an existential threat. When you look at agencies like New York, I just talked to the president of New York City Transit last week, and you look at some of the legacy systems being the older systems, primarily in the Northeast, you are looking at some tough choices that they have to make, whether they are able to maintain their aging systems, how do they pay for that? And so I think we're in a very tenuous position as transit providers. There'll always be a need to move large amounts of people. So transit will always be necessary, but we need another infusion of stimulus money.
Yeah. And you know what? This really, I'm tempted. I'm going to throw you a softball here.
Okay.
The big cities, LA down to LA, downtown, the bulk of nearby, Chicago, New York City. I think just illuminate for the audience. My softball question: can we run those cities without effective transit? Absolutely not.
Absolutely not. It's really a matter. I was talking to a group last week, Marlon, about this, a national group. And it begs the question, how do we want to live? Right? I mean, how do we want to live in this society? I mean, do we want everybody driving a car? Do we want not just congestion, but do we want gridlock? My God. We haven't even talked about climate change and what transportation is the biggest contributor to climate change in the world. And so we cannot run cities without transit. I mean, you've got essential workers that make up the bedrock of our economy, and most of them, many of them, take public transit. So when we think about that, and when we think about the low-income essential workers that take the system, I mean, Los Angeles County and the Los Angeles Metro, we have the highest percentage of low-income riders in this country. The second highest is my hometown of Chicago. And so what you have then is you've got some choice riders, but many of them are in many ways transit dependent. Our bus ridership, the average annual income for our bus riders is about $18,000 a year. So we got to have mass transit.
Yeah, it's essential, and this is one thing that I sometimes think that maybe people outside of transportation just haven't really had an opportunity to grapple with. That these are both transit, not just transportation. Transit is an essential industry for the economy of the bulk of our cities, and I think that maybe people who maybe their own personal transportation life is very auto-oriented. They don't realize it, but yeah, you just can't pull it out.
Yeah. It's really amazing. I mean, I always cringe when I hear people say that we don't need transit. We don't need public transit. I mean, it shows how uneducated those folks are.
Yeah. So you mentioned the large fraction of persons who are LA Metro riders who have low incomes. Right. And this links to, and I want to kind of preface this by noting that Metro has been really ambitious now, both on the infrastructure side and on the ideas side. And for some time, thanks to your leadership, and I'm sure also leadership on the board. Most recently, right in the middle of the pandemic, you have put forward the idea of a Fairless, fare-free transit system, which is really intriguing. Explain for the audience what that is and the thinking behind that.
Yeah. Thank you for that question, Marlon. Let me, before I go into that, let me just say first that I believe that we are much more than just buses and trains, right? When I first got into this business, the guy that hired me, he was the CEO at that time, and he said to me, Phil, we are the T in TOD. And what he was talking about, TOD being transit-oriented development, he was saying, we're just transit. Leave everything else alone. We're just transit. And I never agreed with that, even though I was new to transportation infrastructure. I said, no, I mean, we are much more than that. And so I've always come at this with this idea that we are much more than getting the buses and trains out. Now, that's not to say it's not important. That's our core business. But we are into affordable housing. We are into preparing the next generation of kids to get into the transportation infrastructure space. We're breaking ground on a high school in South Los Angeles on October 21st, a boarding school concept that focuses on foster care kids whose parents were in the justice system. And we're going to be teaching them transportation infrastructure because I'm very concerned about the lack of a qualified workforce. So I just want to start there, and maybe we'll go there later. So the idea then, and the reason I've proposed this idea of a Fairless transit system is I believe we have a moral obligation to LA County residents to pursue a Fairless system and help our region recover from the pandemic and the effects of the lack of affordability in this region and the economic downturn in the region. We know that housing and transportation are the largest expenses for households. We also know that people are hurting out there. I just mentioned the low income population, our riders is very, very high. 69% or so of our riders are low and extremely low. So this is a matter of priorities then for our agency. What is our priority, or is this a priority to provide relief from the poorest in our region? And so not everyone can introduce this, not everyone can do this. I understand it. Not everyone being other transit agencies. We are in a better position for a number of reasons. One is that we have a very low fare box recovery rate. Our fare box recovery rate is only like 13%. Now, what goes into that is a lot of things, but the money we get from fares compared to our operating budget, that fare box receipts, they are low for us for many reasons. One has to do with our basic base fares and that sort of thing. So it's 13% and dropping. So that says to me that we don't rely as much as a New York, whose fare box recovery rate is 35, 40%. They rely on their fares much more than we do. So I believe that there is a way to do this. And quite honestly, I think that this is the future of public transportation. I think Fairless is the future. And I make the argument that transit should be treated just like library services, just like firefighting services. We don't pay for those. I mean, we pay for them in an indirect way. And I think that at the end of the day, that money, if you put fares back into the pockets of those that need it most, I argue that some of that revenue will make its way back to us through disposable income and come back to us through sales tax. Maybe not all of it, but I give the example of a family of four. If a family of four, you got two kids, husband, wife, or partners or whatever, and if three of them need monthly bus passes or rail passes, and those rail passes cost $100 a piece, that's $300. And if you put $300 back into a family, that could mean the difference between homelessness. That could mean the difference between affordability. And so I think there's great benefit to this.
And this is very interesting. And I was quite excited to see this. If Metro does this, this will be the largest system in the U.S. by a huge stretch to go Fairless. In the world. There we are. There we are. I had underestimated the magnitude a little bit. Let's talk, but this leads into the important role of equity in what Metro is doing. And you've been a champion of equity in your time at Metro. And so talk about the ways in which equity is important for Metro. I think both on the ridership side, small business programs, really the totality of the efforts.
Yeah. I think, first of all, we have to look back on infrastructure and history. History has been, infrastructure, I should say, has been used in so many ways to divide people. Whether it's highways dividing neighborhoods and keeping blacks and whites on either side of I mean, I'm from Chicago. The Dan Ryan Expressway runs right through the center of Chicago. And if you look back at the history, part of the reason it was built that way was to keep the black neighborhood on the east side of the Dan Ryan from whites on the west side. Crazy. When you look back on New York, the building of New York and Robert Moses and how infrastructure was used to divide communities. Infrastructure has been used to divide us for so long. And so what we're saying is that everything that we do, programs, projects, we should be looking through the lens of equity. How is it going to impact communities, people? How can we connect communities? It's sort of a buzz saying now in infrastructure. And I hear people saying that, and I think, you know what? Some of them don't even know what they're saying because they don't know the history of how infrastructure divided communities. When I think about connecting communities, I really think about, one, the history of infrastructure dividing communities first. And I'm talking infrastructure, I'm talking swimming pools, my God, swimming pools where blacks couldn't even be in the same pool. I mean, all that's infrastructure. And so the idea that we're looking through the lens of equity for our capital projects, looking at how rail line will the alignment of that rail line, what will be the impact, looking at our procurements, looking at mentor-protege requirements on our contracts, removing, one of the first things that I did when I got here was remove what's called good faith efforts. These good faith efforts that say the contractor comes in and says, hey, listen, I cannot find any minority contractors, but I made a good faith effort and here's my, what I faxed to the community, the opportunity. Hey, if you can't find minority firms, I'll help you do it. So we getting rid of good faith efforts where you say you tried. So we're committed to that equity piece. We've hired an equity officer, the first ever, and I'm happy to see that other transit agencies are doing that now and following our lead. But I think this becomes very, very important nationwide for us to look through this lens of equity to make things right in infrastructure.
Yeah, this is fantastic. And part of it, let me ask, as you're looking at this, there's other big ideas that have been discussed. About a year or two ago, Metro, I think, again, at your urging and leadership, was looking at questions like congestion tolling zones, and expanded use of that. And I think maybe if you could talk about that and maybe how that links in to questions such as fare free transit or the totality of the system.
Right. So about 2 years ago, I introduced congestion pricing or a traffic reduction program. The traffic reduction program, and I said to our board that we want to study the idea of traffic reduction, i.e. congestion pricing. And that we wanted to use the revenue from congestion pricing to fund the Fairless transit system. Now, we are continuing to move along that path of congestion pricing. We have a study that has already commenced, and we're in the midst of that now. And what we're studying are a number of things. Primarily, we're studying the various models for congestion pricing. And there's three models. There is the quartern model, which says, like the London model, which says you go into the middle of the city, you go into the zone, you get charged for driving in that zone. You have the corridor model that says, you got a lane of highway or general purpose lanes, you charge for that area. And we got a model of that with the express lanes, right now on the 110 that we maintain here at Metro as well. And then you have vehicle miles traveled that says if you hit a threshold, so you got those three. So the study is looking at all three of those models. It's looking at which model would work best and where here in LA County. So we're moving down that road, and we're moving down that road not so much for the revenue that will be realized. We're doing it to reduce congestion in this region, because if we don't, we are going to come to a screeching halt in terms of gridlock. There's 2.5 million more people coming to this county in the next 10 or 15 years. We've got to do something about the congestion here in the largest county in America. So we are moving down that road. We will, at the end of the study, we're going to have a pilot area that we will test a model of this congestion pricing. And we're getting closer and closer to the end of that study. And the last thing I will say, is the equity part of this. I mean, we're looking at how we can apply this equitably. But I've made the argument that let's don't jump to a conclusion that this would be inequitable. We have an inequitable system right now with the infrastructure we have now. But I would argue, because somebody asked me, well, what about the guy with the handyman in the truck, right? He's going from job to job and you're going to charge him a fee. Well, I would argue that handyman might be willing to pay the congestion fee if he can get to the second job quicker instead of sitting in traffic. So these things that, we're studying these things, but I think it goes back to the question of how we want to live in America, and especially in LA County. And I don't want to live sitting in traffic, 4 hours a day.
Yeah. These are, this is fantastic to hear, because, and particularly about the possible pilot project, because one thing that we've seen on the research side, congestion pricing and also vehicle miles traveled fees are the kinds of things that when people have some experience with it become more popular. As you probably noticed, they're rather unpopular first out of the starting gate. You've probably bumped into that.
Yeah. You're exactly right. I mean, London right now, with the popularity is in the 75-80% range. They can't take it away if they wanted to.
Yeah. And I think part of it is, I really would salute any effort. Part of it is getting people familiar with these programs. They're outside of most people's experience, and what they imagine is not quite what the reality looks like. So,
that's right.
Yeah. Let's talk about the economy right now and the role of LA Metro in economic recovery. How do you see that?
Well, I a couple of things. First of all, I think that we being public transportation, we are what I call a socioeconomic enabler. So we help folks, right? And when you couple that, the mobility is one thing, but the fact that we have this massive build program is incredible. Now, I'm very happy that at the start of the pandemic, the governor, the mayor, they deemed construction an essential service. Mm-hmm. Because we had hundreds, thousands of people on construction sites for our project. I was just down at our construction site in South LA, the Crenshaw line. So the job creation that comes with building infrastructure, we cannot minimize that in this country. And so when we look at LA Metro and LA County here, and the fact that we are generating jobs and economic growth, I mean, over the next 40 years, LA Metro through Measure M will create 700,000 jobs. Now you take that away from a region and people can see the impact. And so I think that we really are a major player in the economic vitality of this region, and not just this region. I asked my folks to give me a map of the United States about a year ago, and I wanted them to show me through our construction program all of the areas that were benefiting from our program. Now, it's incredible. There were so many circles on that map. It was really, really incredible. We're getting rail cars from, that's being assembled in Boston, Massachusetts at the Springfield factory. We are getting steel from one place. We're getting subdivisions from someplace in North Carolina. We're getting bus seats. And so people all over the country are benefiting from our big program called Measure M here, along with our residents as well through local hire programs and all that, which we support. But it's incredible what infrastructure can do, right? And when you look at the program in Seattle, there's areas benefiting from their program. You look at what New York is doing. And so that is why when there is a lack of building because of loss of sales tax or whatever, we're not the only ones that suffer. People are suffering all over the country in the way of jobs and that sort of thing.
Yeah, and very, very important. Let me come back to maybe just a couple of points, because we probably have maybe about, I'm going to estimate about 10 minutes before we kind of move to questions from the audience. One is the role of Metro in helping the state of California meet our climate change goals.
Yeah.
Vitally important. So maybe if you could kind of just talk through how Metro thinks about that.
I think that, we've got those climate change goals. We have, we're going electric. We have pledged, and our goal is to electrify our entire fleet of buses by 2030. The state mandate is, I believe, 2040. But the ambitious folks that my board members are, they told me 2030. So we're well on our way to electrifying our fleet. The Orange Line up in San Fernando Valley will be the first one, and we will electrify that entire BRT, bus rapid transit fleet, by the end of this year. We'll do the same thing with what I call the Silver Line that runs from San Gabriel Valley down to the south area. So we are well on our way there, but that's not enough, which is why we introduced the traffic reduction program and that whole congestion pricing piece, because us going to an electric fleet is just a drop in the bucket. It is a drop in the bucket in this county. You've got trucks, you've got all kinds of things. You got too many people driving. If we are to meet those climate goals, and by the way, we know climate change is real, for us to meet them as a region and as a nation, we have to do something very, very different. We have to get people out of those gas cars, and we have to get serious about it, and our leaders have to get serious about it. Ticks people off. And again, I go back to that thing, leadership is the art of disappointing people at a rate that they can absorb. They're not going to like this, but we got to be serious about it.
And I really like that phrasing, disappointing people at a rate they can absorb. I will, in the future, as I disappoint people, I will be remembering that myself.
Don't do it too much, though, Marlon.
It sounds like the rate is key.
Yeah, that's key.
But talking about, I like that you mentioned driving reduction, which really is central and I think is sometimes missed. And so then you have to talk about multimodality. These are tough decisions, and they've got to be things like increasing mode share, bringing more people near transit. But let me suggest, have you seen things that suggest that this may look like what congestion pricing looks like? That these may be things that look unpopular until people can begin to experience them. And then maybe, have you been seen any hints that maybe then the popularity goes up?
Yeah, I mean, well, I mean, a lot of people point to, young people, driving less and all of that. And I think there's something to that, even though my son wanted a car, but I think we are starting to see these changes. Now, here in LA County, as we build out this massive system, you're going to see people get out of their cars. We have to make sure, though, that one, we build systems that are connected and they're actually going somewhere. They're going to where the people want them. That is very, very key. The other thing, too, is we're not going to get everybody out of their car, right? But can we create a situation where instead of you driving 15, 20 miles all the way downtown from where you live, maybe you drive 2 miles to the parking lot and get on the rail or get on a bus rapid transit. And so I think that's what we have to be focused on right now. We have to be focused on that first last mile piece, that piece that gets them to the mass transit. That's the piece we're working on. I mean, we just started micro transit here. This is Uber-like service using smaller vehicles and using our labor force. And so we've got to do those things all over the country because people are not going to all of a sudden just abandon their cars.
Yeah. This is fantastic. And the micro transit experiment that you mentioned, which is really exciting, and I had not been aware of, thrilled to hear it. It highlights Metro's role as a thought leader. I mean, Metro is so large that what it does can influence the industry. And so that's one area. And another area, when you mentioned electrifying the bus fleet, this can really actually push the development of vehicle technology. And you all are well aware of that, probably even think of that, self-consciously.
Sure. No, we do. I mean, that was one of the first things that I wanted to do when I arrived here was set up an office. And I was thinking about the name of this. I was actually dreaming about this, say, hey, and I named this office the Office of Extraordinary Innovation.
Which is the best office name ever, I got to tell you.
I'll tell you, and that's the phrase I was dreaming about, what could I put in that name? And I came up with extraordinary. And so we were thinking about this whole thing. Now I see these innovation offices popping up all over transportation. And, we did this 5 years ago. And I said, it's fine that, these offices, these innovation offices are popping up. That's great. But if I see one with the name extraordinary in it, I'm really going to get ticked off because that, nobody can steal that from us. But you're right. I mean, what we're saying around the country is that we have the ability here in Los Angeles County to set the stage and to set the marker way out here for the infrastructure industry. And that's what we want to do. We commissioned a study, How Women Travel, trying to figure out how women travel and what we can do to enhance our system based on how women travel. The microtransit that you mentioned, the electrification of our fleet, a workforce program called Workforce Initiative Now that looks to bring in ex-offenders and put them to work. I mean, all of these things, we do not have to be limited to just running the bus and the trains. Our portfolio with affordable housing, our entire portfolio, our goal right now is 35% affordable for developers that want to do business with us. We're increasing that. So all of these things, I think, we need to be bold. We need to be innovative, and we need to do what I call stepping into leadership voids. Now, we do not control everything. We get that. But we can influence, we can instigate, we can impact, and we can step into those voids and push people that are supposed to be responsible for various things. We can push them to do their jobs as well.
Okay. This is fantastic to hear. It's been evident in what Metro has been doing for years, and including the Office of Extraordinary Innovation. I will tell you, students notice it. They come to me, they say, what's this name? It sounds a little wild. And I tell them, because I feel honest, I say, you got to take a look at that. They're doing amazing things there. So, we do have questions coming in, and but before I go to the first question, let me ask one more thing. You chair the National American Public Transit Association Recovery Task Force, kind of the COVID recovery. We talked about that a little bit, but let me give you a little bit of, since you're the national chair of that, to kind of talk about that APTA role in kind of recovery from COVID.
Yeah, well, I'm proud to be the chair of that National Recovery Task Force. Yeah, I mean, it's something that I was honored to do, and I take very seriously. The idea behind this was to help transit agencies all over the country put in place policies and practices that transit users have told us they want and expect. And so this task force, a pretty large task force, probably about 30 people, and my co-chairs were around the country, the CEO of Washington Metro, the CEO in Columbus, Ohio, and then a public sector executive at one of the private sector firms. And one of the major things that we put together in terms of a deliverable was this idea of a health and safety commitments program. And so what we're saying there is these agencies that sign up for this health and safety commitments program, they are signing up and they are committed to doing the things that our riders expect. So the four major commitments from the agency to the rider, following the health agency guidelines. The second is cleaning and disinfecting. Then providing information and resources to riders, air filtration. Those are many of the commitments that we have to riders. And then we said that riders should be committed to some things as well, like wearing face coverings, all of those things. So we put that together. We've got about 200 transit agencies around the country that have signed up, and they are getting a customized toolkit for their agency with an emblem that they can put on their buses, on their trains, at their stops, saying they are part of this health and safety commitment program. And so it's all designed to provide a level of confidence to riders that this system is clean, is safe, and that sort of thing. So it has worked around the country, and you'll see those emblems on our buses and trains as well here in LA.
Fantastic, wonderful. And I see that Frank has come in from off camera. And Frank, how do you want to handle these questions? One popped up and then went into the answered bin.
So let me jump in. First of all, thank you both. I feel like really a kid in a candy store right now because I could keep you here for several hours with my own questions. I'm not going to do that, of course. But as Phil might know, my other hat that I wear as a mayor and council member in Rolling Hills Estates, this is a major, obviously, topic, especially for my community, because we would love to do exactly what Phil was talking about, to be able to tie to rail I would love to take that micro transit to rail and take that rail up to USC when I'm able to on a daily basis in a comfortable car and a secure car of rail, which I do in Europe when I travel on a regular basis. So let me start asking a few questions. First off, I grew up with rail. I grew up with public transit, just like you, Phil. I was born in Istanbul, and I walked to school K through 4. We moved when I was in 5th grade, so I took the bus to go to school in 5th grade. And then my parents sent me to Paris, one of the best infrastructures of public transportation in the world. And from age 11 to 18, I took the metro on a regular basis, right? So I am very accustomed to this. I love public transportation from that perspective, but there's a number of things that you mentioned that I want to touch on. But let me get to a couple of questions that was asked first.
Okay.
The first question is, which relates to the issue of the dilemma that we had with the gas tax. So the gas tax was great when gas was, everybody was using gas and expensive. And all of a sudden we went to electrification and we went to reduction. Then we said, oh my God, now we don't have enough money. So it's now vehicle travel miles, etc. So the question is being asked is, how will future funding work with the new proposed free transit when we are attempting to reduce automobile use and disincentivize automobile ownership? Wouldn't that reduce sales tax from fewer automobile sales, which are huge numbers, cut into current budget? What will happen then?
Yeah, great question. Great question. Under the current gas tax scenario, less driving will bring down those receipts. It's no doubt. But what comes to my mind is, what's more important to us at this point? Now, obviously, the revenues, we need the revenues. But when you look at climate change and you look at those things, so that would be my first question. What's more important? I think the climate goals that we have, with those climate goals, we are going to have to look at another way of funding infrastructure. The gas tax on a federal level has not been raised since 1992. I believe that the gas tax should increase at the federal level, first of all. But we're going to have to look at another way. Now, is this congestion pricing? But if we are hell-bent on, and we should be, on reducing driving in automobile, gas-operated vehicles, then we have to look at another way to fund. And I think one way is that congestion pricing idea. This is why this is taking off. I mean, New York are a little bit further along than us with congestion pricing right now. And it goes to that question of when you have less cars on the street. So my answer, which is probably not a good one, is that we have conflicting priorities right now. We're saying that we have to address and reach these climate goals, but at the same time, the gas tax revenues are decreasing. So we have to come up with another way to fund infrastructure. And my hope is that we will get there both at the federal level and at the state level.
I guess what the question is raising perhaps is to do a study to figure out what that revenue from sales tax is on car sales, and whether or not that could be replaced. I mean, I'm just trying to learn. I mean, I'm a student for life, so I try to learn from questions, and that to me would be a natural thing to learn, because the impact may be very substantial, but yet it may not be. I don't know. I don't know the answer. I don't know what the data is.
Well, we've talked about that internally, of studying that. And so that's something that my Office of Extraordinary Innovation has actually been thinking. I think what you find out, though, is is people, we've got to have bold leadership to, after the study, to begin to implement these things as well. And that is one of my concerns as well. Do we have the bold leadership to say, hey, listen, here is the solution, and this is what we have to implement as a solution. We need that bold leadership to do that, not just here, but at the federal level as well.
So the next question, actually, also, I jot down a few notes here, but it speaks dearly to my heart as well. And it says, could you speak more about the microtransit program, the formation, the current scope, et cetera? And here, personally, actually, as you may know, we have PV Transit as a small transit agency that services the Palos Verdes Peninsula, which ties to Metro, actually. And our supervisor is very kind to, it was Don before, now Janice Hahn, to help us with, to make sure that we are able to transfer people from one side of the peninsula to the other and tie to Metro offerings, whether it's in San Pedro or in Rancho Palos Verdes, for example, to be able to kind of connect to Metro. But the use of that, I had never thought about even at a larger scale. The use of that for what you're trying to think about, I think would be tremendous. Maybe you should comment on that microtransit a little bit more.
Absolutely. So we have fixed route service, right? That's like a 40-foot bus out there. We got rail. The idea with microtransit initially is to fill in those gaps, as you said. So where we cannot do a fixed route like 40-foot bus, we are thinking, and we've already deployed this idea of microtransit in smaller vehicles. And what we've done over the last year is we created some zones that we were operating in. We had 3 zones. And we're operating in those zones for the last year. And so now we want, and it's been highly successful in those zones, right? And those zones are, the microtransit is taking someone in that zone to the rail station, in Pasadena or whatever. So we've been doing that for like the last year or so. Now, starting in December, we are increasing, we're up in the ante. We're expanding that microtransit. We are bringing on 40 more operators. We have more vehicles. We have managers to manage the microtransit system. So we believe that where we cannot get fixed route transit in those areas, right, that we will supplement those areas, or if you got areas where it's low ridership and we want to keep service there and not terminate service, we can do microtransit in those areas. And that is what we're doing. So we're going to expand this in December, even more than we have now. The other thing I would mention is another thing that we're doing, and all of this is called micromobility. It's in the family of micromobility. So we're doing something called mobility on demand as well, right? In addition to microtransit. Now, we may weave this mobility on demand within microtransit to make microtransit larger. But the mobility on demand was a experiment and was partially funded by the Federal Transit Administration to do this on-demand service. You call up on your phone, but it's just like Uber, right? You call up on your phone, boom, and we were doing it for free. We were doing it for free, and we're still doing it for free. And we had 5 pilot areas for that mobility on demand. That was a smashing hit. And so we're going to weave that in with microtransit. But these things, nobody's experimenting these things at the level that we're doing here in LA. And these things are incredibly popular, and they're taking people to, it's not door to door. So we're not coming to your house, but it's curb to curb, we call it. So, the corner of such and such and such and such is where you pick this thing up, and it takes you to a fixed route or a depot or a station.
I can see this working very well, especially places like the Palos Verdes Peninsula that is not served very well by mass transit. And I would urge you to take a look at PV Transit, actually. Really, it may be a great way to accomplish that. PV Transit circulates very well on the Palos Verdes Peninsula. I can see that connecting to the rail that you're talking about, provided that, of course, here is my thing about rail or these kind of transportation issues. In Europe, I get on a train, there's Wi-Fi, very comfortable seating. So those are things that are going to be important for commuters that are going to do this and are going to be committed to doing it.
That's right.
Because without it, it's going to become more of a nuisance to them. But regardless, Europe is very successful at doing this. And public transportation has become second nature to people. And I'd love it if we can accomplish that too. Let me jump to the next one. The next question is about you mentioned the word new mobility, for example, solutions. And of course, that brings up the issue of autonomous vehicles.
Yeah.
And initiatives with maybe Tesla. I've been in that boring. I've gone 120 miles an hour in a Tesla car. I'm sure you have too. Yeah. It's really a cool thing to experience. Talk more about those kind of technologies, how they can fit in what you're talking about, this new mobility solutions.
Yeah, we do think they can fill in, and autonomous vehicles, I think they are coming. They're already here, really. And so we are trying to find ways that, they could be applicable. I do think that there's going to be an autonomous bus very, very soon. I think the issue for us, and it's not really an issue, is the technology. And I can say the same thing for electric buses as well. The technology and the price is going to be the big issue. I mean, when we look at the electrification of our fleet, what is happening now around the country, people have varying goals to electrify their fleet. We have the most aggressive goal in the country for 2030, and we have a large fleet. Now, what I keep explaining to my board is that the fact that we have this very aggressive 2030 date, and even the rest of the state has a 2040 date, what does that do for prices, for unit cost? Now, what that does, we're going to end up paying more for that vehicle because we won't have the benefit of purchasing in bulk, in the case of like the whole state. And that's just a reality. So, you don't want to be you want to be on the leading edge of technology, but you don't want to be on the bleeding edge of technology. Right now for an electric bus, a 60-footer is running about $1.2–1.3 million a unit versus our clean natural gas fleet, which is clean. I mean, it's not diesel. That thing is running, I don't know, maybe 600,000 per unit. So when you start, thinking about technology and AV, you got to think, we have to think about the technology and the price. Now, the feds can help us with some of this if there were a federal mandate for everyone, now that changes the whole dynamic. If you're talking about New York having a date like 2030, Chicago having a date like 2030. I mean, I talked to the president of Chicago Transit Authority, who's a good friend of mine in Chicago. And I said, hey, we got this 2030 date. What date do you have to go electric? He said, Phil, listen, man, I mean, I'll get there when I get there. So, I mean, and he's got, a fleet. We've got 2,200 buses here. We got one of the biggest fleets in America. But New York has a 6,000 fleet system for buses. Now, can you imagine if they say we're going electric, that price is going to go down. And so we're concerned about that on the AV front as well. It's technology and price.
So I'll come back to a sub part of that question in just a second, but congestion pricing.
Yeah.
And I know Marlon focuses on this from a scholarship point of view as well. And at the end, actually, I'm going to ask you a question as to how we can help. But let me ask the question about the congestion pricing part. I think a lot of the pushback I get on the congestion pricing part issue is whether or not you're able to deliver what you say you're going to deliver. And let me give you a perfect example of this. The 110 freeway north, which is what I take on a regular basis. Mm-hmm. We did that fast lane, the paying lane, so to speak. But at peak hours, you're paying $14 to go anywhere from where I am all the way to downtown, but you're not getting your $14 value. Uh-huh. So how do we ensure people that congestion pricing is actually going to do exactly what we say that people are paying for?
Yeah. That's a tough one, Frank. That's a tough one. Part of me says that, and I know that's variable pricing, right? Depending on the congestion that's in the express lane. And when you say you're not getting the $14 worth, what you're saying is that you're still sitting in traffic, right?
Yes, you are.
Right. I think we have to really look at, whether we need to expand this to general purpose lanes or an extra lane or something like that. Now, what we do here in this country, we say, hey, if the demand goes up, then we should raise the price. And that is something that people don't like. But the question would be, and this takes a study and all of that. So I don't want to, just be sort of flippant or too quick about this, but I think we need to study how we can improve that whole thing. And it might be raising the price, because this is a supply and demand issue is what this is. And if you have that great of demand, so you've got all these people in the express lanes that's making it crowded, we need to run tests on what would happen if we raised it to $16. I mean, those are the kinds of things that we have to look at because that's what we do in this country, the supply and demand. So you're right. I mean, before we do anything to expand congestion pricing, we do have to make sure that folks get what they pay for. And it depends on, what part of the region you're traveling from. I mean, sometimes I drive down here on the 10 from San Gabriel Valley, and I've never had a problem. You know what I mean? I mean, the traffic in those lanes are always, 60, 65 miles an hour. It's pretty good. So we need to look at that.
Yeah. In fact, I'll give you a perfect example. Last year, I drove from Paris. I taught in Armenia, came back to Paris. Wow. I wanted to go and visit Germany. So I drove this time because the trains were full and I didn't want to wait for the next day. So I rented a car and drove. It cost me 65 euros to cross 4 hours of freeway just to pay for the road, the congestion pricing. But I was traveling. I mean, I was getting my 65 euros worth of flying on the freeway, right? I mean, that's what I'm talking about.
90 miles an hour, no speed.
That's right. So that was working well. All right, let me get back to also asking you, you talked about making potentially this one of the largest public transportation system free.
Yeah.
Is there another example of that around the world at this magnitude?
The closest one is probably Luxembourg, that has a Fairless system, free transit. But they're not even bigger than, our system here. So we would be the largest. Now, what we've done is we've created a task force to study all of these things, identify the challenges, offer recommendations on how we can implement a Fairless system. And I've asked them to bring me a report back by the end of this year. It's a very aggressive, I introduced this in August. It's in a very aggressive timeline. And some of the things that we're looking at funding opportunities to fill that gap of that 13% that I mentioned earlier. We collect between $250 million and $300 million a year on fares, but it only makes up 13% of our operating costs. So again, that's what puts us in a better position. So I've asked them to look at that. I've asked them to look at the true cost of the fare collection function. And that sounds simple, but it's not. The true cost of the ticket vending machines that are out there and the maintenance involved with them, the fare boxes on 2,200 buses, all of this fare collection and money processing. What is that? Now, I do know, and I joke about this, that I am treading on a spinoff of what Eisenhower talked about, the military industrial complex. I am dealing with the transit industrial complex in this, where I may need police protection myself. Because that transit industrial complex is very strong. When I announced this in August, I started getting calls from wait, what the heck is Phil talking about? You know what I mean? But I want to know what is the true cost. Now, I believe that I can make up some of that 250 to 300 million fare. That's going to go down if I offload the fare collection cost or some of it. So we're looking at that. I'm looking at the impact on operations. Chances are I will have to increase my on-street operations if the system is Fairless. I get that. What does that mean for extra buses, extra trains? What does it mean for homeless? We have a homeless issue on especially our trains now. How do I solve that if I go Fairless? So this task force is looking at all those things with a report back to the board. I will brief the board in probably January with the hope of going with a Fairless system sometime next year.
I think those are great questions to certainly explore and ask for. I'd be really curious to know some of the answers, or maybe the answer ultimately may become a hybrid where you make the fare $1 or something, or 50 cents, who knows?
Yeah.
Where there is some skin in the game and you may solve some of the issues you're talking about, transient or no transient or extra service, less service, et cetera, by making some sort of a hybrid response as opposed to a complete response. But those are great. To be honest, like I said, I'm like a kid in the candy store between the two of you. I can ask question after question, but I want to bring this to a close by simply saying that, you mentioned Harvard Kennedy School. We are tied with Harvard Kennedy School as the third best public policy school in the nation. I want you to know. So they're very good in the East Coast. We're very good on the West Coast. So I was going to ask you with a major center, as in we have in Metrans, as I know you know,
yes,
and scholars like Marlon, how can we help you? What can we do to help you? We're here to help. So, and would love it to participate to some of these things from my perspective, from a governance perspective, which is my discipline, what I teach, but because there is absolutely governance topics, public administration topics involved in the topics you're discussing, would love to help. So please feel free to reach out to Marlon, to Metrans, to our colleague Jen Giuliano, of course, whom you know, and others in our community at Price because we'll be delighted to be part of all of this that you're suggesting and all of these innovation that you bring to the office, which we're grateful for. And last but not least, please give my best to my dear friend Rafi Hamparian.
Yes.
Who sits like few offices away from you.
Right. I will let him know. He's one of our cornerstones around here.
Indeed. Well, anyway, gentlemen, thank you so much. This has been extremely rewarding. And for our mayor's council members, we're going to make sure we get this out to all of them. It'll inform them of what's coming and what may be, and maybe even focus on what can come, and we can do that another time. I think there is a study in Los Angeles and World Economic Study about flying taxis, for example.
Yeah.
So we may perhaps come back to that conversation another time, and how we can fit in the process. That would be great. But again, thank you both. Unless you have anything else to add, I'm about to end this meeting right on time with our folks. I again thank our staff very much. They do this such a great job in corralling us and getting us to these things. And it's really, really helpful for us to be able to reach out to the community that we serve in our local leaders, which is what our program is about in executive education. And I encourage everyone to focus on what's coming next. We're going to be talking about sustainability and solid waste as not just waste, but part of sustainability with our colleague Antonio Bento, as well as the vice president, a senior VP from Edison, for example, as well as topic of electrification and smart cities, and that's going to come up. And of course, in the waste topic, waste management, Susan is going to be participating on behalf of waste management, talking about the future of waste and sustainability. And finally, our city managers summit will come up in November 19th. We're hoping for a major speaker to join us, and we're actually in the last phase of making sure that person accepts our invitation, and we're looking forward to that. So join us. Thank you, Phil. Much appreciated. Thank you, Marlon.
Thank you,
Much
Marlon.
appreciated. This was fun.
Good to talk, Phil.
All right. Thank you.
Talk to you all.
All right.
Bye-bye.